Market panel for reaction. Scott Martin of Kingsview Asset Management and Fox News contributor, and Veronica Dagher of the Wall Street Journal. She's also host of Watching Your Wealth podcast. Scott, first of all, I know the argument, a couple of thousand jobs. That's just a kind of drop in a desert. We need millions of more new jobs. But still, this is a beginning, and he's not president yet. And he got at least plaudits from one of the guys who claims, yes, Trump is why I was hiring.
Yeah, it reminds me of kind of the debt and deficit talk, David, over the last few years. A couple billion here, a couple billion there. You get actually some real money over time. And that's really what the jobs picture is telling us with what President-elect Trump is doing. He's getting these businesses, David, to, I think, refocus on not moving production and labor outside America, but to bring it back in and work within the confines of this great country that we have and the capitalistic society that we have running here. And that's really what I think really helps the stock market and a lot of the businesses going forward, as far as the small businesses, the consumers, is investing in America and being happy that we have someone in the White House that finally cares about business.
Veronica, I've talked to a number of companies, the managers of whom have businesses or operations overseas. They would love an opportunity to bring some of those jobs back here because, frankly, they don't like managing from overseas. It's difficult to do. It's easier when you're managing in your own country with your own people. If there are enough incentives there, don't you think there will be a swarm of jobs coming back?
I think so, and I think it's key. The incentives are key, and that's what we need to hear more about. I think we also need to hear about, and this ties in with tax reform, is if companies are going to get to repatriate all the cash they have overseas, what are some of the incentives they're going to have to create jobs? We've seen so many companies do share buybacks, and that's fine for shareholders, but that's not necessarily good for American workers. So how can we get CEOs to be motivated to use that money to create good, high-quality paying positions?
Right. All right. Fresh roadblocks for Trump's tax plan. The president-elect's historic overhaul of the tax code could hinge on approval from an obscure congressional committee. Scott, this is the Joint Committee on Taxation, and this goes down to that same dispute we always have on this front, is how do you score tax cuts and account for what the debt incurred as a result are going to be? Do you use dynamic accounting, static accounting? How do you quantify how much growth will come as a result? These guys are going to try and do it and then try and decide whether the tax cut makes sense. Worrisome, yes?
Yeah, it is worrisome, and the word obscure is a funny one there. I could think of some other euphemisms that we'll leave in the back of my mind. But I'll tell you, what's funny, Melissa? You're right. The dynamic scoring has been a louder and louder argument, but it's really tough because you can't exactly predict what behavior is going to be like on a capital expenditure basis, on a consumer spending basis, depending on what the economic climate is. I will tell you, though, the cure to all this, debt and deficits and tax cuts, is growth. And I think that gives us a better chance at growth going forward than Obama did.
It's very true. And this goes back to this thing, Veronica, where, on the right, generally, you want to know how much is this going to cost before you agree to it. At the same time, you really can't do that because you have no idea how much growth is going to result. I think there's going to be a lot of growth, but I wouldn't even dream of trying to quantify it.
Right. It's so complicated. There's so many different factors, different estimates. How do you predict that? Other things factor in, like higher interest rates, how that's going to affect things like the deficit and payments on the interest of the deficit. So it's very difficult for lawmakers to figure out. And I think people need to realize, while tax reform is likely to happen sometime next year, I'm not sure if it's going to necessarily happen in the first half of the year because of some of these complexities. So I think there might be more political will to get things done, like repeal and replace Obamacare, get regulations, taken care of in certain areas first before we see tax reform because of some of these complexities.
No, tax reform first. But I hear what you're saying, Veronica. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
David,